Hello there, welcome to MIA Podcast, another episode where we answer the question, will Australian manufacturing ever return to the glory days of the 60s? And here to help us answer that question is Dario from Carbonix. Welcome, Dario.
Glad to be here.
Fantastic. And look, if you're a first-time listener or watcher, the whole point of the MIA podcast is to explore, work with businesses who are in manufacturing right now and those who support manufacturing. And part of it is looking into the tech side of manufacturing, where Australian manufacturing is really starting to take off and I guess find its feet in the overseas market as well. So perfect lead in. Dario, do you want to tell us a little bit more about Carbonix and how you fit into manufacturing and what your business is?
So Carbonix specializes in obtaining aerial data insights. We do that by flying remotely piloted aircraft or drones for long distances, carrying sophisticated payloads safely. So we're effectively replacing what is currently being done mainly by helicopters or crewed aircraft. We're doing it with a smaller, more efficient and much cheaper solution that can then be scaled. So the idea is that we have developed a platform, an aircraft that is very lightweight, very efficient, is able to carry payloads for longer distances for a given energy use or energy content of the aircraft. We've developed the carbon fiber processes to build these airframes lightweight and efficient, and the design processes that go with it in terms of being able to simulate the aerodynamics and the way the aircraft will behave in the air. And we've also developed the avionics and the electronics that support this and the software that then enables it to continuously improve. So what we're offering is the ability to see things from the air with insights that then can help our customers make good decisions in terms of their interventions on the ground.
Yeah. So look, I did have a bit of a tour of the factory just before we kicked off the podcast here. I can absolutely vouch they're incredibly lightweight. So for those who are listening, we are going to have some pictures in the show notes as well. But essentially, I was not ready for the size of for the drones. They are a few feet across. How many feet, or how big exactly? Probably go metric. I don't know.
Metric. So we have two models effectively, and we then pick and choose solutions to best suit the particular mission of the customer. The all-electric version that we refer to as Volanti is about a 4-meter wingspan, carries about 1 kilo payload for about 2 hours using an all-electric propulsion. And then the larger aircraft that we call a Domani is about a 6-meter wingspan, and it carries up to 5 kilos for 6 to 8 hours. And those weights are driven by the sensors that are required to get the resolution that we need for the missions that we want to perform. So basically, we start from the thing that we want to carry, which might be a LiDAR that gives you a scan of ground topography or infrastructure features. That might be combined with an RGB camera that gives you imagery that then gets draped over the LiDAR cloud. That would then have an IMU, which basically tells the payload where it is, and the comm system that allows us to connect to the aircraft either via radio or via satellite. We then need to pack enough fuel to carry that payload for the time and the distance that we want to carry it. That in turn drives the area of wing that we need effectively. So then we build the structure of the aircraft around it. And we've converged on these two models and the two sizes because they accommodate a wide variety of missions and applications for our customers.
Yep. Fantastic. And do you want to just give a little bit of insight into, especially in Australia anyway, the uniqueness of your product as well?
Yeah, I think without sounding too arrogant, I guess we are pretty unique in the world. There's a fundamental physics problem that needs to be solved with lightweight, long-range aircraft. So the ability to combine the lightweight structure, the aerodynamic efficiency, the durability of the system in terms of it's out in the field, it's being thrown in the back of a ute, it's flying in rough weather, being able to have something that's lightweight yet strong that's aerodynamically efficient, that has the command and control architecture to make sure it flies reliably and efficiently. All of that is quite a high barrier to entry. It requires a lot of R&D, a lot of test flying. You have to make a lot of mistakes, have a lot of crashes, do a lot of learning. And that's really a body of knowledge that we've built over time that makes us pretty unique. And we've gone for this gap, this opening in the market between what you normally might think of a drone, which is a multi-rotor, like a quad plane, that effectively just hovers and is very practical in terms of you can launch it from anywhere. You can do vertical missions, you can hover in the air and get a really good sort of steady, still angle on what you're trying to film or scan. But they're just limited in their range. And that's down to the physics of the amount of energy that they're using to stay in the air by beating the air into submission with their rotors. And then you look at the opposite end, and there's the big military stuff that's in the tens of millions of dollars. And we fit in between. We have a capability that approximates the military aircraft, but at a commercially viable cost. And to do that, we've had to tackle, as I said before, the carbon fiber processes to get the shape, the finish, the strength to weight ratio, get it reliable, get it repeatable, make it consistent. The actual electronics hardware, so the boards that carry the autopilot and the sensors, and then selecting things like motors, servos, all of that has to be sort of worked through and done. And we've done that in-house. We're now at the point where we're scaling production for the Volante, which is in series production, where we're making identical copies rather than sort of developing it. And for that, we've actually partnered with Quickstep, it's another Australian company, to actually scale that manufacturing of the carbon fiber composites.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think from the show's perspective and Australian manufacturing in general, it's pretty exciting to see these types of these things have been taking off. Excuse the pun, but I think one of the things that we've always said on the show when we've had our guests is that Australian manufacturing has always been known for its ingenuity, its high quality, and if we look at equivalents of many years ago, had the old Hills Hoist, Victor lawnmowers, that was all Australian ingenuity. Was it Wi-Fi, I think, as well?
Yeah, that was
Cyro. Yeah, those sort of things. People forget that. People just assume it was some American thing, but I think we are great at producing that techie side of things.
It goes unsung. There's an ecosystem that even we've discovered and become a part of that's evolved over the last probably 5-10 years. Just in drones, where, for example, the core autopilot unit, which is basically the processor and the IMUs that run our aircraft, is a Cube Pilot, which is manufactured here in Australia, and it's come out of the ArduPilot project, which is out of the Australian National University, and that's an open source with a commercial option, and they're the leading sort of drone autopilot in the world in terms of it ranges from hobbyists who use it to commercial users that then sort of fork off the code and do their own thing. But that was all developed here in Australia, and it sets the standard globally. I mean, of course, there are commercial autopilots internationally that might be built as commercial products to begin with, so the characteristics are slightly different. But something like ArduPilot, the way the feature sets are incorporated and it evolves and it's flexible to be used on different vehicles. That's one example. Then there are companies like Karawong in Tasmania, Orbital in WA. They do motors, which again, they supply various international drone manufacturers in terms of just internal combustion engines. There's Ascent Vision Technologies, that formerly UAV Vision. They do payloads based in Newcastle. They also have a gimbal camera that's a sort of a world standard product. Companies like Advanced Navigation that supply, I think I might be wrong, but even the Google autonomous cars uses advanced navigation IMUs. So it's a bit spread out. It's a bit so you need to be in the know to know, but it's certainly there, and the skills are there, the ingenuity, and maybe the scrappiness. The idea that we've got to figure things out ourselves because of the distance, the geography, the economic constraints. There just seems to be the ability to just solve the problem without too much hype, and that seems to be an Aussie thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think who knows where it came from? Was it from, I guess when the British landed here, we had to find a way, and all the way back to when we had people on Norfolk Island trying to grow farms and those sort of things, and then we had all the issues with droughts and whatnot. I guess we've always just gone in and lent each other a hand and found a way. It is what we're good at. Now, I'd like to just explore a little bit your backgrounds. So for those who aren't aware, I guess if you Google your name, you may find out. But Dario was involved in the America's Cup. So do you want to give a bit of a background as to what you did?
Yeah, sure. So I was involved in a few different teams in the early 2000s, I guess, to 2000 to 2010 before I started Carbonix. It was never with an Australian team, unfortunately, always overseas teams. By the time I got involved, the last Aussie Challenge was in 1995, basically. There was one in 2000. It was sort of a junior team kind of thing. I was always interested in the mechanics of it, so the design of the aerodynamics of a sailboat, how it moves through the water, how it generates motion through just the wind, and the structures that are required to support it. And I got involved in yacht racing, different levels, different projects, sort of working my way up, and finally had a chance to become a part of a team. Started as a boat builder. I wanted to get hands-on experience, and that was right at the time when compasses were becoming a viable way to build a competitive boat. And so there's this relentless search for performance in the Cup, and it's funded and it's very focused. And composite materials at the time were the most promising way to achieve those gains. And I was involved watching it all happen in terms of experimenting with different ways to lay up, to cure, to design, to model. And yeah, that was... it was great fun. It was great to be involved, and you build a network in there that still to this day I'm sort of involved in one way or another. But now with Carbonix, that sort of takes the focus.
Yeah, it's all fluid dynamics at the end of the day, isn't it?
Very, very, very similar. If you imagine a sailboat is an aircraft with a wing in the water and a wing in the air, the simulation tools are the same. The emphasis on the things that make a sailboat fast are the same things that make an aircraft efficient. And that's everything from the way you generate the lift to the way you react the loads to the way you control it and make it stable, and the processes that go into building it. And I think there's also a sort of deeper level synergy between a competitive environment like the Cup and a startup. In terms of if you look at the down to the basics of what the America's Cup is about. You have a set of arbitrary rules that are, the boat can only be so long and weigh so much and sort of fit within this box. And the race is on Sunday, and whoever comes first wins. So very simple premise. The challenge then is you have to resource it. You have to how do you get the funding to make it all happen? You have to have the people and the talent and the skills. You have to have a way to coordinate it and to get them to focus. So get everyone to work together. Again, you cannot buy time in the America's Cup. You can buy resources, but you can do things in parallel up to a point. But if you waste time going down rabbit holes of things that don't give you the performance advantage, they're not going to postpone the race because you want to go back and do it again. And so it's really about this, getting a team together to work in harmony towards a common goal with constraints. And if you look at a startup, very similar.
I guess it's that. I love that analogy of. I guess you would be a bit of a master in knowing if you are going down the wrong direction, when to call it halt or not. I don't know.
I'd like to think you develop a gut feel for it. And the interesting thing with design as well is part of what we do is we mentor. So we have interns and apprentices, and emphasizing that process that you go through when you design something, where you come up with an idea and you want to do a really quick call initially, where you do a high level analysis and you go through a gate to say, is this really dumb or could it work? And then if it gets through that stage, then you can do a really rough test. So we've been known to, fly with things gaffer taped to the aircraft or do simulations strapped to the roof of a car, ways to just get a feel for if something's going to work or not.
Yeah.
Then as you progress, you can refine it and you can iterate and you can tweak. And I guess the whole thing of R&D is it's an iterative process. But there's also a choice between refining something proven and doing sort of a reinvention of the wheel. And sometimes radical ideas are rewarded and it's worth doing, but they generally don't just pop out of nowhere. They will combine different things in a new way. And drones are actually a case in point where we had the carbon fiber composite know-how from the sailing and various other projects that we did in the early days of Carbonix. And what's made the current product and the current business proposition possible is the emergence of small, lightweight payloads together with very concentrated computational capability, which means it can have the ability to process what the aircraft needs to process on board. And that stuff may have come out of mobile phones or out of other applications of consumer electronics or out of the military. And we're really just combining them in a new way. We're adopting the best that is on offer from these various industries, putting them together, and then solving the practical problem of how do you take this thing out in the field, launch it, send it off on its mission, get the data back, make sense of it, come up with useful insights. So the fact that we can take off and land vertically was really part of this requirement. It's like you need a fixed-wing aircraft to get the range, but you don't want to have the constraints of a runway or a catapult or a clumsy launch and retrieval system. But putting VTOL on an aircraft makes it heavy and it robs you of range and efficiency. So how do you get around that? And part of our solution is being able to claw back some of the weight and some of that penalty that you lose by using lightweight materials, very efficient command and control processes, and just refining and refining and refining.
Now, with that R&D side, have you been involved in the government R&D grants or?
Yeah, so there's the R&D tax incentive, which is basically entitlement, is not a grant. It's if you are doing activities where you can show that there's experimentation involved and you're not then selling the product until it's ready. So yeah, we've been doing that quite regularly, and it's a big help. It lets you get back some of the money that you've spent, and it mitigates a little bit against the sort of high cost, high regulation environment that we find ourselves in. We've also had grants. We've had a New South Wales government on the Physical Sciences Fund, which was, again, to sort of get a product that was at a ready for commercialization, getting it out there, that sort of last step of the way in the hands of the customer. And we also had some interest and support from the military with CDIC, the Centre for Defence Innovation Capability, that's since changed name to ODIS, the Office for Defence Industry Support. And that's, again, part of helping businesses to reach the standard that the Australian Defence sets in terms of security processes, quality assurance, testing. So we've been involved in that.
Yeah. And did you navigate that yourself? Did you go through a broker? How did you find that process?
Look, initially myself. As the business grew, we used advisors and consultants variously. There's for the R&D, we use MJA. That's a local consultant here in Sydney. And yeah, I think you need to understand it in principle and know sort of what you're aiming for. But then it is quite a complex and specialized field, and a bit like you need a lawyer to understand laws. Sometimes you need these advisors to help you navigate the intricacies of grants.
Yeah. I think this is something that we have been discussing with some of our guests on the podcast. Anyway, is this whole there's a lot of businesses out there who would either be 5 years behind or just wouldn't be financially possible to be where you are without the tax incentives or the grants. Where do you fit in that picture?
Of course, it helps. It really makes our own investment go further. It means that your spend, your burn, your runway is effectively shorter because you get some of it back. sorry, it's longer because he gets on the back.
Yeah.
It certainly helps. Again, if you really wanted to be critical, you'd say that there's an admin burden and cost, because paying the consultants, effectively ticking all the boxes you need to tick for whether it's a grant or an R&D tax incentive, there is an admin overhead that goes with it. Obviously, you get that back and some, but in the ideal world, you'd make life easier to begin with and cost lower to start with, rather than sort of having to spend and then try and get it back.
Yeah.
But there are obviously advantages to that as well in terms of the environment that we live in and the services that we have. So it's a compromise, and I think it's a good one, as long as it levels the playing field a little bit with overseas markets that we're competing in that may not have the regulatory burdens and the costs that we have. So it sort of helps.
Yeah. So speaking of overseas, what would you say is next for Carbonix in the near future?
Yeah, so this year and in the short term, we've been concentrating on Australia, mainly to be close to our customers, to be able to support them and learn and go on the journey with them. The next focus is certainly the United States, or North America in general, including Canada. Main reason being it's a very similar market. So we've developed our system, and it's fairly payload and application agnostic to begin with, in terms of the aircraft has a certain range, it has a certain payload weight that it can carry, and whether we're flying a coastal patrol mission as opposed to a mine or a railway or a power line, we can do all those equally well. But really the strategy is to focus on the linear infrastructure market for a number of reasons. It's a combination of the data being critical, because they're missions that are currently being done by crewed aircraft in a very sort of basic way. We know we can do it better. We know we can do it cheaper. We know that there's an appetite for that, and it can scale because there are a lot of power lines around the world. So we're going for that market initially. And the US is a bit of an analog in terms of, if you look at a state like Texas, it alone is about the size of Australia in terms of the market and the potential just in that segment. At the same time, we are doing sort of mining flights and other types of linear infrastructure where they leverage the same payload and the same mission, and they allow us to sort of expand into different markets. So certainly the US is our next focus.
Yeah. Okay, so let's switch to we'll have a quick look at the labour market, and then we'll look into, I think, a point that you raised way when we first kicked off, is that whole thing of, I would say the red tall poppy syndrome in terms of manufacturing, but we'll come back to that one. So in terms of the labour market, something that I have discussed with a lot of guests on the MIA podcast is this is looking at skilling up our labour market within Australia, to be able to, one, I think, fit into what we would say is traditional manufacturing, and then the second is more the generation 4 of manufacturing, where we do have sort of the more technical side of manufacturing. So you mentioned before that you have there was an intern program. Is that? Yeah. Talk a bit about that, because that's quite of interest to our listeners, I would say.
Yeah, so we're a bit unique in that we have a design function and a manufacturing function, and they're very closely coupled, and they're interdisciplinary. So if you think of an aircraft, you've got a frame, a carbon fiber shell that it all fits inside, that needs to be designed and built, and then you have electronics that go in there, and there's a packaging, a connectivity side, and then there's a software element that runs the whole thing. And so that all has to be developed in unison, because there are always compromises and trade-offs that you're trying to make in terms of volume, weight, vibration reduction, temperature management, all of those things. And so our mechanical engineers work with electronics engineers in terms of sizing heat sinks, and then they have to be fed into the body of the aircraft and be streamlined, aerial placement, interference between various elements. And so we have a very interdisciplinary approach. And we run it deliberately that way, so that there's a lot of sharing of what people are doing. So even though, again, a mechanical engineer might be curious about what the electrical engineers are up to, and they'll have a knowledge transfer session, once every few months, where they sort of go over a project and they teach each other about their disciplines. And with interns, similarly, we have mechatronics interns and we have mechanical and aerodynamic, depending on what the sort of work that's on at a given time and what the university pipeline offers us. And the idea with an intern is you want them to then stay and become an employee and learn the culture and come along the journey with you. We're finding that there's certainly no shortage in terms of people wanting to undertake that journey. Obviously, there's a certain attitude that's required to keep pace in a startup and to sort of properly partake. But we see it as our responsibility to create the culture that allows that to happen, which means everything from employee participation in the form of a share options program to bonding activities and fun stuff that you can do together to make it not just a work relationship, and development. Like we encourage our employees to go and do courses and continued learning and things like that. So that makes it an attractive place to work in terms of not just the money, but the way that your day unfolds. And you have the opportunity to see something that there was an idea, go through the process of being tested, and then end up on the aircraft. So you'll design something today, you'll see it out flying tomorrow. And then there's a whole process that goes around that and the learning, and you get feedback from the flying team and the flight test engineers. So we do sort of avail ourselves of those that pipeline coming out of the universities. And at the same time with apprentices, same thing. We have a very specific sort of set of skills and processes that we teach in terms of handling the carbon fiber, the precision required to trim and bond, and the cleanliness. And teaching that from scratch, we're able to upskill someone. As long as they have the attitude and the aptitude, we can get them to the point where they can build one of our aircraft.
That's pretty exciting. And looking forward, I guess as your business grows, that can be, I guess, a bit of an incubator. There's obviously other parts of the industry they can tap into as well. But now, are you feeding into any government-specific programs to get in contact with the universities, or are you going direct?
We have been going direct. We've been teaming with universities to go after particular grants that might be available. We have, with the internship program, I think that was a government initiative that sort of subsidized part of the interns' pay and program. But we had interns before that. It's just that came along, made it cheaper.
Okay. And so next part of what I want to look at is this whole thing of something I talk about a lot in the program is us, Acidity as primarily a marketing business, is this whole thing of when Donald Trump came into power, he essentially put, I would say, lit the light, which had American manufacturing definitely jump into a whole new level of confidence within themselves. There was, I would say, a bit of shakiness on China's part because no one had really rattled them before. They were sort of, the go-to people if you wanted to do larger scale manufacturing. I think it's given Australia, obviously, there's the set of issues of supply chain, COVID, all those sort of issues as well, which has given Australian manufacturing a bit of a boost, the modern manufacturing initiative, etc. But what we look at is the stark contrast between American manufacturing and Australian manufacturing, where I think in general we do have a tall poppy syndrome where we aren't as allowed as American manufacturing. What's your thoughts on Australia getting its voice out there and really showing the world what level of quality that we have?
Look, it's a good one. I can't say I've experienced the tall poppy thing. I think we've had a lot of support from people. It might be that there is a reluctance in Australia to aggrandize. Like there's probably a lot of hype that is built into the system in America where you might shout 10 when you're only doing 8. We tend to do 10 and shout that we're doing 5. There's the sort of, if you start spruiking yourself too much, the reaction Aussies have, fair enough, is get your hand off it kind of thing. They I think they don't react well to self-promotion and hype. But if you're doing something extraordinary or useful, and you're performing, and you're doing it quietly, and you're doing it well, and you go out there and you show that you're doing it, I think there's nothing but respect and support for that. And we're seeing that with the way utilities that are an inherently conservative business are looking at what we're doing, and they're saying that this is good. This is something we want to get behind. We want to adopt. We want to experiment with. Obviously they want to see it proven. They want us to show them how it will fit with their business as usual. They want to make sure it works and it's not going to let them down. But with all those caveats, they're on board for the journey, and they're interested, and they're willing to invest and take some risks. So we're finding that. I think if we were out shouting that we're the best thing since sliced bread, then obviously we'd get a bit of a more skeptical reaction. But one of our values is do what you say. It's really part of the culture of the business, and even to do with the performance of our aircraft. What we advertise is what we've tested. So as long as you're realistic about what you're proposing and you have the right attitude, I think there is a lot of support there. About pride in Australian manufacturing, I mean, that's one argument, but the reality is, if there's a better, cheaper product overseas and I can get it, why would I pay extra for an Australian one? It's really, I think that whole argument is a bit vexed. It's sort of trying to guilt people into supporting Australian manufacturing. I think that the real valid argument is we need it, because you can't rely on an overseas supply chain that, even though the borders may be open today, tomorrow there could be any number of changes in the balance of power, closures, things that get in the way, that means that suddenly you can't get the thing that you need. So having either the ability to build it here or the ability to pivot into building it here, having the fundamental skills where you might be making product A tomorrow, but you can switch to product B without too much of a disruption. I think that's really the argument, and that's both in the military and in essential things. And even in whether it's entertainment or discretionary things. Doing it here is not because we want to do it here because we're proud of doing it here. It's because doing it here is safer. And that's really what it should be about.
That's an interesting argument. And another layer that we are hearing is that whole sustainability layer as well. Obviously, the big obvious is there's less of a green footprint typically if you are producing locally, transport, etc. But it'd be interesting to see where this whole sustainability argument moves ahead, and how much of an impact that has on Australian manufacturing, because it is a little bit chicken and the egg. If I guess what we've probably both observed is from the 60s, 70s, that's manufacturing's just sort of chipped away, and then as a result you've got supporting industries disappear, transport, logistics, all that sort of stuff disappears. And for manufacturing to really sort of flip its head, there's a lot of other supporting industries that need to be ramped up again. But I guess what I'm observing is industries like yourself, where it's a little bit more tech heavy. You sort of starting paving the road yourselves. Is that a fair call?
I think so. I think there's the bottom line is we can't compete on cost. We can't be the cheapest, but we can be the best. So it's a matter of that value add. So I think looking for supporting or boosting or subsidizing manufacturing where there's a very low value add, where it's a low skill, it's a repetitive thing, it's someone pulling a lever on a production line that can be automated, that can be done more efficiently with 3D printing or with a robot or with some other, then by all means that should be done. I think keeping it alive artificially doesn't really benefit anyone because you're not adding value. But anything where, aviation is a great example, space is a good example, where the thing has to be right because otherwise it won't fly. There are lives at stake and safety. That's down to processes, high-tech materials and solutions, And what does high tech mean? High tech means there's a lot of value add in terms of there's a lot of testing and development that goes on behind it, and the implementation is very critical. And I think that's really where we could shine, where there's an opportunity to educate and train today's workforce to create that skill base that'll then go into the future and get passed on. And it has to be around doing things smartly and doing high value add activities.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. And so from a getting word out there in the marketplace, how do you see yourselves getting word out to the North America, and I guess where your next steps are as well, and what hurdles do you see in the way?
Yeah, we've been fortunate that we've developed a bit of a awareness in the industry because of the things that we've been doing, and we've been at it for a few years. And so we've had international customers come to us, having done their sort of due diligence and research, and found that, okay, this Carbonix aircraft does what we need it to do. They're the only ones who are at a point where they're likely to deliver, and they have interactions with us where we sort of educate them about what's really possible, what's hype, and how to navigate that. And so the initial sales that we've made into the US have actually sort of come to us.
How have they found you? Is it through other industries? Is it something similar like a Google search? How
combination. So some of it is just through industry, whether it's going to UAV specific shows, or talking to our partners, like for example with Quickstep, they have a presence in the US, so they can connect us, or they have been connecting us with potential customers over there. We do have Australian customers that have maybe an overseas arm that might then put us in touch with the US, whether it's a parent company or their twin sort of sister company. So there's been a lot of inbound. There's been a lot of word of mouth. At the same time, we do have a bit of a profile. We go to shows. We feature in newspapers and magazines, and we tend to come across people's radars. But again, we're in a very new and very small industry. So if you Google, long range VTOL UAV, if we're not the first result, we'll be among the top 3.
Yeah.
And it's not because we've got a really good SEO campaign. It's because we're the only ones doing it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, if you're unique and you're sufficiently differentiated, then sort of the universe will bring you to the attention of the right people.
Yeah.
Obviously, going forward, we will be, or we're already starting to have a more structured and focused BD campaign, and that's part of our growth strategy.
Yeah.
But the reality is that until now, we've had way more demand than we've been able to supply. So it's really a matter of strategically prioritizing and saying, we may have a customer over here that has a technically really interesting use case where we could customize a drone to do something really strange and wonderful. And over here, we might have a customer that wants a standard product and might want a few tweaks, but they might be representative of 100 other applications that are in common. And so obviously we will navigate towards the one where we can sell hundreds of copies rather than 1 or 2.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess like one of the points that we I guess with Australian manufacturing is wanting to get across is that whole point of having your digital presence up to scratch. We feel is incredibly important. Just that whole concept of even if you do have referrals coming from some of the business you're working with, that whole thing of like eventually someone's going to have a look at your digital presence and probably your PR presence as well, because that's probably the only thing they can go off, apart from trade shows, obviously, where you can obviously have that face to face and they get a real feel for your business. For what we've seen, I know you guys are different, but what we've seen is a lot of business out there who sort of their website was built in 1999, and they're expecting to then export into the world, and compete against other businesses. And it's like, well, if it was purely digital, you know, you probably don't have much chance of getting chosen. So for me, for us, that whole journey of, you know, however of inbound, where you are leading them to your team, so you can have those proper discussions and you know, either convert or have them in a holding pattern, wherever it might be, is incredibly important for every, you know, every manufacturing business, I would say.
Absolutely, and it's it maybe is part of the personality profile of someone who's in manufacturing, that they want to be making things, they don't want to be talking about making things. But the reality is that your website is your shop front. You need to. It's almost one of those things, because everyone else has one, you have to have one, and it's how people find you. It's the first impression that you make, but it's also an opportunity to share what you're doing. And again, from my experience in the early days of Carbonix, one of the sort of fundamental decisions is how secretive do you want to be as a startup? Do you want to keep it all to yourself in case someone copies you, or do you want to tell the world what you're doing? And I very deliberately made the choice to share the journey, because I love what we're doing. I think other people will be interested to hear it because I find it interesting. Hopefully other people will find it interesting. In the very early days, when we were still doing stuff for the marine industry, making, you know, boats, A-class catamarans at the time, I would just blog once a week about a particular detail that I was working on. So why is our bow shaped like this, or why have we chosen, you know, this particular layout? And that whole journey, I sort of did it out of a gut feel, because I thought it's fun to put it into words and to put it out there. And slowly but surely it generated a following that effectively made me a subject matter expert. And then from that I got sort of requests from magazines and podcasts to sort of go and talk and do technical reviews or pieces. And that sort of generates an awareness that, okay, these guys, they're passionate, they know what they're doing something interesting, maybe they can solve my problem. And that's really where, and even now with the drones, like we're very active with the industry body, AAUS, where we sort of get together, and it's really about this collaboration. It's about saying we need a synergy between, in our case, the aircraft manufacturer, the operators who actually go out and fly it, training organizations who will sort of issue the licenses for people to fly, the payload manufacturers that, you know, we ultimately, the payloads and us, we go after the same customers. If they make a sale, we make a sale. So collaborate, be part of the ecosystem, be very clear about where your expertise lies, and share what you're doing and get it out there, and really enjoy the process of saying, look, we're on this journey, we're learning, we're doing some fun things, we're going after a pretty ambitious goal. Here's what the experience is like.
Yeah, you used a word there, collaboration, and I would say, you know, definitely the segment of industry that you're in, you know, it's critical, and we, you know, we're part of the reason why I've done this podcast is, you know, there's a layer of education which I think will result in more businesses wanting to collaborate with each other. You know, understanding what everyone's doing is yeah, as I say, critical from an information and education perspective as well. And yeah, it'd be great to see more bodies out there helping to facilitate that collaboration as well.
I think it's really down to knowing where your strength is. So as a business, if you don't have a unique angle and you're just doing what someone else is doing, then you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
So you want to know that, okay, this is our strength. This is the thing that only we can do, that we do best. How does that fit with the other things that other people are doing in a way that generates more value for the customer? So again, as an example, in our case, we don't build payloads, we buy them and we integrate them into our aircraft. And so we have relationships with the payload suppliers to give them feedback about what they should do for the next version. They support us in integrating. We pass customers to each other, and it's all part of this ecosystem where it's you know, better together effectively. And knowing where that lies. So not being afraid of, I'm not going to collaborate with this guy because we might end up competing against each other. You really need to know where your strengths lie so you can do that.
Yep, 100%. So look, we are heading towards the tail end of the podcast. So is there anything else you would love to share with our listeners or watchers before we ask our final question?
I guess the entrepreneurial side of it, which again for me is a new experience because I spent my life in teams in whether America's Cup or yacht racing. When you set out on your own business, there's obviously you're taking a plunge. You have a vision that you believe in, but you have to then convince the world that it's worth backing and collaborating in, and you build up a team around you. Very important to again, complementary skills, similar to what we were saying before. I'm good at doing this thing, but I need someone who's good at doing all the other things around me, and bring that together. That journey is something worth experiencing that I think people, if you're in the position that you can, you should, and give it a go. And again, I think that's a particularly Aussie thing. I think having grown up around sailing clubs, for example, the ability to just walk down and put your hand up and say, I want to give a hand, or I want to learn to sail. There's a very open culture that's pretty unique over here. And I think if you take that attitude into what you're doing, you will get more support than probably most people expect. So if you have an idea, go for it. And at the same time, be involved, learn, and go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that, actually. That's great. I guess the entrepreneurial journey, it's tough, but it's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, and you have to be in a situation where you can afford to take the risk. So generally early in life, when you don't have a family, when you can sort of afford to lose it, walk away and go get a job. I guess that helps. And then there's that, it comes in humps, right? You get to your first success and you're on top of the world, and then there's another mountain to climb. And that goes on, and you have to sort of accept that, be used to it, and say, well, I've got this far, this is great, let's see if I can get to the next step. And hopefully get to a point where you're not alone. Like, it's lonely at the beginning, but now in Carbonix, there are stakeholders that are as invested as I am, as on board as I am, and you can see that you're not carrying it all on your shoulders. And that's a fantastic outcome if you can get there.
Yeah, 100%. So our final question, which you did actually, I think, partly answer anyway, but the final question is, in your opinion, will Australian manufacturing ever return to the glory days of the 60s?
I'd question the premise.
Yep.
I'd say, I don't know how you define the glory days. I think there was a time, again, back to an analogy of sailing, if you'll indulge me, Australia, I was very small, won the America's Cup in 1983. Different world, different competition, different history, but they did it through this sort of plucky ingenuity where they went back to basics. They spent a lot of time learning what other people were doing. They had a go, and they just happened to put a combination together that got them over the line. And we saw that with New Zealand as well when they won in 95 with a small budget. So that is possible. That's something that happened then, can happen today. I think the type of manufacturing that was at the cutting edge in the 60s, big things, rockets, engines, heat, beat and treat sort of processes, the whole world was heading in that direction, and I think Australia learned from it and was a part of it, and there was a necessity. So the high value add was, the latest car or the latest air conditioner or the latest physical machine. I think now we're in a time where it's a lot more dominated by software, automation, things like 3D printing, processes that don't require that hands-on approach, but require a lot of intellectual ability that goes into it to begin with. That's not to say that the physical hardware is neglected, but the way the hardware is brought about is different. There's a lot more automation. And so I think we already are in that high value add area. I think the danger is restricting too much through regulation. I think we do run the risk of falling down by things like not being able to go and test fly, go and experiment, get together in groups where you sort of arbitrarily say, we're going to give this a go, we're going to go somewhere out of the way, we're not going to hurt anyone, but we're going to, and that's really what I see as the danger, the sort of creeping regulation that makes everything harder and just more friction around every corner with everything you want to do. But I think the focus is broadly correct. I think we are at least strategically looking at high value add stuff, which is today's equivalent of what was happening in the 60s. So I'd say, by and large, optimistically, if we're allowed to, we will get there.
Good answer. Another angle. So look, thank you again, Dario. Really appreciate your time coming onto the podcast and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom, and where your business is as well. We're pretty excited about where Carbonix is going to head over the next couple of years, and obviously best of luck tapping into the North American market as well.
Thank you.
Now, if you are listening, watching, we will have some show notes as always. We'll have a few. I don't know if you're watching, you can see an image behind me where we've got one of the drones in action. We'll be able to put something similar on the show notes as well, and obviously a link to the Carbonix website. But for those who are listening, how do they find out more about Carbonix?
Our website, as we discussed, it's just carbonix.com.au. We're pretty active on LinkedIn, and reach out to us, drop us a line.
Perfect. And for those that are listening, it's carbonix.com.au. So thank you again for listening, watching, and we will see you in our next MIA podcast episode. And thank you again, Dario.
Thank you.